Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, a wonderful day to talk about all the short form literature that exists in the world, and I wanted to talk about a short story about rental properties and death. I am referring to The Funeral Bill by Jason DeYoung. For those who don't know, Jason DeYoung, there's not a lot of information available about him. There's his website and also his Twitter page, which he doesn't really update too often. But he's a short story writer primarily, although he has written a book that is due to be published, I think, this year or something like that. And one of his short stories was published in the Best American Short Stories of 2012 or something like that. So he's been getting his work published for about a decade now. And there's not a lot of information available about him otherwise. That's kind of a rarity on Short Story Tuesday. Usually happens on Poetry Thursday, but sometimes on Short Story Tuesday you get a writer who is known for primarily writing short stories and doesn't really have a lot of information available otherwise. So without further ado, let's get to the short story though. I'll talk about The Funeral Bill, do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Funeral Bill focuses on Jeffers, a money-obsessed, property-obsessed landlord who lives in what appears to be a rural area where people don't make a whole lot of money. A lot of people seem to be in poverty, and he takes advantage of that. At the start of the story, Jeffers is getting up there in years. He's a bit older. He used to have a number of rental properties. He said upwards of like 20 or so, but due to time and failure to upkeep and selling them off and whatnot, he's been left with just a couple rundown properties that are decrepit, and some of them are filled with squatters. At the start of the story, he's focusing on death, noting that his own death is probably coming soon, and he also seems to be obsessed with it in that his two wives in the past both died without him being present. His first wife died while he was closing a business deal, and only his son was around. And despite his attempts to ask his son, what he saw in the moment of her death, he feels like he's not going to get a good answer. And his other wife was her children from a previous marriage came and took her away as she was nearing the end of her life, so he didn't get to witness her death. So he's very obsessed with this moment of death, though, and it follows throughout the entire story. And at the beginning of the story, one of his tenants died, and so the tenant's husband comes. His name is RD, and he says that he wants Jeffers to pay for the funeral because he claims that the house was haunted by the ghost of his ex-wives, and RD continually taunts him about this, even though Jeffers asserts the house isn't haunted. And RD even claims that Jeffers beat his ex-wives. At least that's what the ghost are saying, and Jeffers asserts that that's not the case. And while he is tempted to pay for the funeral, he ultimately decides against it, as he feels that RD is pulling some sort of scam on him. At another one of his properties, Jeffers encounters a pregnant woman who he kind of becomes obsessed with and gawks over, because he feels that pregnant woman has the ability to give life, something that is escaping him at this present moment in time. He's beginning to feel numb in his legs, and he finds it difficult to walk, and he realizes that sooner or later the numbness is going to come to his heart, and he's gonna die. Despite the pregnant woman claiming that she has nowhere else to go, Jeffers tells her that she has to get out and leave, otherwise he'll take legal action. Sometime during the night, he hears his dog yelping out, and he goes out and discovers that someone has seriously injured his dog, and so the only thing he can do at that point in time is to end the dog's suffering in a pretty gruesome and grotesque way. He thinks that it might be RD playing games with him for some reason. Although so what he does is he decides to take the dog and throw it down RD's chimney, which is only hurting himself because he owns that property. And RD later comes by and claims that the house smells very weird, and he doesn't quite know why, which Jeffers just laughs about because he knows what has happened there. Finally, it reaches a point where Jeffers can no longer tolerate RD, so he goes to the house where RD is staying at, and he just straight up shoots RD. And while RD is dying, he says, "What do you see?" And the only thing RD says is that he sees Jeffers, and Jeffers becomes deeply scared that there's nothing in the afterlife. He says we're perched atop nothing, in his words, and the only thing he has left to do is to shoot RD again, make sure he dies, and then he calls his son up, who presumably calls the cops. And as the story ends, Jeffers is being taken away as the pregnant woman watches from a distance. In terms of analysis, there is a great deal to talk about here. One thing that I want to get out of the way first is talk about this gothic atmosphere that DeYoung has created. It reminds me a lot of Edgar Allan Poe, specifically with the terrible protagonist who has a lot of moral issues with him, such as stuffing dead dogs down chimneys and killing people and just treating people like garbage. You get that a lot with Poe's protagonist, who eventually receive their comeuppance, and Jeffers does receive his comeuppance at the end of the story, specifically getting arrested for shooting somebody, but also it seems that his lifetime of being obsessed with money and status and stuff like that, as laid out throughout the story, it's resulted in him kind of being alone. He has no one to turn to, and when he does try to turn to people, they only want money out of him. They only seek something from him. His own son wants one of the properties that he has so that he can turn it into a church, and so he seems to have no one in his life, and this results in a very dark, kind of sad atmosphere. Allow me to read you a quote from this. Jeffers envied those who had seen a person die. He believed they understood what he didn't, what death brought. He asked the renter's little girl what had happened when her father passed. Without a tear in her eye, she said she did not know. She hadn't seen it. This envy had taken root when his son James witnessed his mother passed away while Jeffers was out making a deal with a man named White, who was ignorant enough to believe a handshake was still as good as a notarized contract. For James, watching his mother's passing had been such a powerful thing. He'd gone into the seminary. He now ran a church out of the storefront of an old third-rate grocery in the lower part of the state. Its sanctuary still smelled of hoop cheese and day laborers. Jeffers thought his son would have been better off reopening the grocery. But James had witnessed many of his parishioners die, some of old age, others from disease. Each time his son told him of another Jeffers' resentment grew. He never asked his son what it was like, afraid he'd get an earful of capricious religious nonsense, a tangle of words that would only make him feel stupid. And that reminds me a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's writing. And I think it's great that DeYoung is able to channel Edgar Allan Poe with this story. There's multiple other sections throughout the story that are gothic and dark and gloomy and kind of, unsettling. And I like how he's creating this unsettling atmosphere with his story. It's something that I haven't really been able to encounter with very many stories apart from Poe. So somebody's carrying on Edgar Allan Poe's legacy out there, and it appears to be Jason DeYoung. Another fascinating element of the story is the obsession with death. As I noted in my summary of the story, Jeffers is very obsessed with death. He seems fixated on it, especially as his life nears its end. And because his life is nearing its end, maybe that's why he's obsessed with death. He's constantly reflecting on his past wives, who he didn't get to see die. And maybe that's also why he's obsessed with death. Because his first wife, he was closing a business deal, and so he didn't get to see her die. And the second wife, her kids took her away for end-of-life care before he had a chance to watch her die. And so maybe it's one of those two reasons, either being near death or not getting an opportunity to be with his wives when they were dying, that he's so obsessed with it. And part of it might be because he wonders what comes in the afterlife. because he hasn't seen the death or watching people die, he hasn't had that opportunity. Maybe he doesn't really know what comes afterwards. And so, given that he's been focusing a lot on money and vice his whole life, maybe there's nothing positive waiting for him in the afterlife. That would be really sad, but it'd be fitting for a man like Jeffers who doesn't seem to want to offer ease or anything like that for another individual. You really get the feeling that maybe he feels he's doomed to hell or he's doomed to nothingness, and so he's wondering if there's anything in the afterlife. And after shooting RD, he asks him, like, what do you see? Tell me what you see. And the only thing RD says is nothing, possibly as a way to antagonize Jeffers for shooting him, but also maybe that's what RD really sees, like there's nothing. And that really shocks Jeffers to his core. It results in a very fascinating quote that I would like to read to you. He could sense the numbness creeping in again, and he removed his shoes and socks so he could rub his toes. We are perched atop nothingness, Jeffers thought. We make up heavens, but we are atop nothing. He didn't want to go home, he called his son. And so I really find that quote to be interesting. I don't really understand it 100%, but if I'm going to interpret it, it seems like what he's saying is that by shooting RD and making this realization, he has realized that this reality is the heavens, and he wasn't living his heaven to the best extent. And there's nothing there's nothing below. He's not going to hell. He's just going to die. And so he lived his life for a pretty sad purpose, for money and for his status. And in the end, it got him nothing. Like, it's not getting into heaven, it's not getting into hell. There's only one reality, and he wasted his time there. And so that's what I think it means. If you have a different interpretation, absolutely tell me so in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this. The last thing I want to talk about with this short story is Jeffers' houses. The story provides great detail about how run down Jeffers' houses are. It's the first thing we learn about it is that it's decrepit. He's let it go for some time. He hasn't made any effort to repair it. And when people do come by and offer to repair it, he's like, oh no, don't even bother. Just get out and don't squat in there. And another RD indicates that the house might be haunted. So it doesn't look like, those houses are in good repair. And I think you can see what I'm getting at. That those houses actually represent Jeffers. That DeYoung here is making a comparison between the decrepit houses and the rundown state of Jeffers after years of being lonely and not having anyone around apart from the people he's providing a service to. Jeffers is the house in this case. Like, he's haunted by the ghost of his past. In this case, his wife, maybe his son, who he doesn't have a great relationship with, and some of the tenants who he treated like garbage in the past. Although he doesn't seem to be resentful or regretful, it's very clear that he is as he shoots RD, and as he does everything. He makes a deep mistake, and it kind of follows him throughout the story, how he wanted more, but he never did anymore. He only focused on one thing. And so, his legs have become numb, and he feels that, his body is breaking down, much like his houses are breaking down. And although nobody has shoved a dead dog down his chimney, so to speak, it's clear nobody wants to be around him in the same way. The house smells, and he smells of terrible character or something like that. But it's very fascinating how DeYoung is able to connect the two, and it's something I didn't realize till the end of the story. It's a very slow, creeping realization that this house that he's talking about and this person, that they're kind of one of the same. And it's really sad, because if you have a vision of that house and how terrible it is, imagine being a person who was like that house. So very, very sad, and just wonderful writing on DeYoung's part. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Funeral Bill by Jason DeYoung. A pretty wonderful short story. One of the best that I've read recently, and just really gothic and unsettling. And I think I'm going to recommend it to you out there because it's really good writing. I'll put a link to it in the description so that you can find it. And we'll talk about it in the comments below. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you thought of the review. If there's there's anything you disagreed with, I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about Jason DeYoung. I feel like I'm kind of in the minority of people who know about him, and so if we can get his writing out there, that would be pretty swell. And then until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and deathy travels. Farewell.